All right, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us this afternoon to talk about some fun Dallas ghost stories. Uh, my name is Jordan. On behalf of the library, I just wanted to thank you again for coming and just let you know a couple of housekeeping things. Your mics will be muted as participants, um, and they will remain that way for the program so that we can focus on the content at hand. If you do have questions that you want to ask for a Q&A section, you can go ahead and put those in the chat, and we'll make sure they make their way to our presenters today. Also, full disclosure, we are recording this meeting and we are live on YouTube. So if you do not feel comfortable with that, you can always watch the program later on our YouTube channel, Dallas Public Library. That's all for now. So I will pass it off to Helen, who will introduce our speaker and tell us a little bit about our department.
Thank you, Jordan, and happy almost Halloween, everybody. I am so excited that you're sharing your time with us today. And I'm going to give a quick little presentation, and then we're going to turn it over to John Slate so that we can get to the good stuff, because everyone's here to hear haunted tales of Dallas. So my name is Helen Dulac, and I am with Dallas Environmental Quality and Sustainability. And we are so excited to be partnering with the Dallas Public Library on this series called Earth Day Every Day. And we offer these every Thursday at noon. I just want to give you a brief history of our department because you might have never heard of us before. We were formed in 2004, and back then we were called the Office of Environmental Quality. And we worked really hard for 4 years to help Dallas become the first city in the United States to achieve ISO 14001. And what that means is we looked at our operations in 14 departments about how we can provide service with less of an impact on the environment. And we were able to achieve this special certification. And it wasn't a city in California. It wasn't a city in Colorado. It was not Austin. It was Dallas that achieved this first. So Dallas has a history of being green, and we want to continue to be green. So let's fast forward 10 years to 2018, where a lot of changes happened in my department. We actually had a restructuring the city, and we absorbed some other environmental operations, and we became the Office of Environmental Quality and Sustainability to reflect that change. Also in that year, we created a combined outreach and engagement team that I'm a proud member of. And the following year in 2019, Mayor Johnson created an Environment and Sustainability Committee of City Council. They meet, I believe, the first Monday of every month. And those meetings are open to the public, and they're great to attend to keep an eye on the environmental pulse of the city and see what is going on. Now, if you have heard of our department, it's probably because on May 27th of this year, Dallas passed the first Comprehensive Environmental and Climate Action Plan, known as CCAP. And this is our roadmap for the next 30 years on how Dallas, as an inland city, not a city along the coast, but an inland city, is going to tackle climate change and improve the quality of life for all of its residents. You can see that plan at dallasclimateaction.com, and you'll see that a lot of actions that the city takes for the next 30 years will be tied directly to the CCAP. I mentioned that our department doubled in size a couple of years ago, and those 3 things you see in green, those are the new groups that joined us. And I'm going to talk about one of those just briefly, and that is stormwater. So earlier this week, we had a lot of drizzle, and some of us got some rain. And so when that rainwater leaves your property, or even the water from your lawn sprinkler system, anytime water leaves your property, it goes down your lawn, down your driveway, into the street, all the way down the gutters to the big drain at the end of the street. Well, that big drain is called a storm drain inlet, and it is there to remove the water so the streets don't flood. Well, we have about 70,000 of these in the city, and they work great at quickly removing that water. However, they remove the water so fast that it cannot be cleaned nor treated before that water connects to a stream or a creek. And then it connects either to one of our lakes or the Trinity River. So if that water picks up any pollution along the way, whether it be litter, Halloween's coming up, there might be some candy wrappers that are dropped on the ground from trick-or-treaters, or bacteria that's sitting in pet waste that someone didn't pick up. So we remind you to pick up after your pet on all walks and from your yard at least once a week, or even from lawn chemicals you might have put down, or if your car is leaking any sort of fluid. All of that can be picked up by that water, goes into the storm drain, and that's how pollution can end up into our lakes, creeks, and rivers. So just be mindful about what you're doing outside, because pollution doesn't always stay at home. I mentioned that I am a member of the Outreach and Engagement team, and we want to empower Dallas to save the earth. And we do that by virtual presentations like this and in person when we're allowed. You can invite us to speak for free to your HOA, different clubs and organizations. We also have a lot of information and material for students all the way from K to college. And we also host some major events. Speaking of which, we have a great one coming up on November 7th. It is the 26th Dallas Waterwise Landscape Tour. We want to invite everybody to participate in the seminar. It is free, it is virtual, and it is open to everybody. And you can get more information about that at savedallaswater.com. And if you have a water-wise landscape, if you have a pollinator garden, if you started growing vegetables during the pandemic, let us know. Enter your landscape to be an inspiration stop on this year's tour at savedallaswater.com. You need to do that by Halloween midnight. So if you're not going to be passing out candy to trick-or-treaters, enter your landscape into the Water-Wise Tour. If you invite us to speak to your club or organization, we can talk about environmental topics from A to Z, all the way from air quality to zero waste. And with that, I want to invite everyone to visit our website, greendallas.net, and to get more information and to invite us. If you want to invite us to come and speak to you, you can do that at that website. Also, if you ever have a question for us, you can send an email to that will come to me or my team at greendallas@dallascityhall.com. And for being our guest today, we want to offer you a thank you gift for spending your time with us. So send your name and your mailing address to greendallas@dallascityhall.com to get a free thank you gift. And of course, follow us on social media. We are Green Dallas TX on Facebook, and we are at Green Dallas on Twitter and Instagram. And with that, it is my esteemed pleasure to introduce our speaker today. And John Slate is the city archivist for the city of Dallas, where he has been responsible for historic city government records in the Dallas Municipal Archives since 2000. He is a member of the Academy of Certified Archivists and a fellow of the Society of American Archivists. He possesses a BS from the University of Texas at Austin and a master's degree in library and information science, specializing in archival enterprise from the same institution. He's written numerous articles on archives, photography, music, and Texas history. And he is the co-author or author of 4 Arcadia Images for America series books, including Historic Dallas Parks, Lost Austin, Dealey Plaza, and John F. Kennedy Sites in Dallas-Fort Worth. He is also the co-author of Managing Local Government Archives, printed in 2016. And with that, I am so excited to be announcing and welcoming John Slate.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Hope everyone can hear me all right. And I want to welcome everyone to Friends in Low Places, Weird Tales and Fascinating History in Dallas's Historic City Sites. My years in the municipal archives has put me in contact with a lot of interesting information, and I thought that I would share that with you today. Ghost stories are fun in Dallas. There's a lot of haunted places, and some of them are well known and some of them are less well known. So you may be familiar with some of these already, but so for those who are sort of new to ghost hunting and learning about spooky parts of Dallas, I'll run over those, but there are also some lesser known places that you might want to know about. Well, I'm going to, first of all, let me see here. Hold on. Give me just a moment. There we are. Just wanted to let you know that the materials, unless they're indicated on here, the materials come from the municipal archives. And one of the reasons I love doing these kinds of presentations is because I can show you interesting documents and photographs and maps and things. And this is what we're all about, is preserving them and making sure that they're available for people to use and also to have fun with them. All right. Anyhow, this is a sort of atmospheric photograph. This has a shadowy figure in the distance. This is a lonely street or railroad track or a trolley track going down in South Dallas. And I don't know exactly where it is, but it's from an original negative in the archives. But I think this is sort of a suitable way to start and sort of give you a sort of atmospheric feel for the kind of parts of Dallas that I'm going to talk about. Well, let's talk about one of the probably the most famous ghost story of Dallas lore, and that is the Lady of the Lake at White Rock Lake. This is a beautiful late 1940s image of White Rock, and you can see how beautifully forested it is. Of course, it's a lot more built up now. But the Lady of the Lake is a very common sort of folklore story that occurs all over the world, actually, in many different forms. But we have our own Lady in White or Lady of the Lake. And the way it usually goes is that a man is driving along on Lothar Drive, and he sees at night, and he sees or at dusk or something, and he sees a strange sight, which is a woman by herself on the side of the road wearing 1920s era evening clothes. And he pulls over and she says, well, can you please give me a ride up to Gaston Avenue? And man says, sure, come on, go ahead and get in. And so he is making rounding the lake to try to get to Gaston. And the woman's really very quiet, doesn't say anything during the whole trip. But at the point he reaches Gaston, the man turns to his side to ask the woman where he wants her to stop, and she's mysteriously vanished. She just disappeared, and leaving nothing but a wet stain on the car's seat. Now, in some stories, the lady is coming on her way home. She was on her way from a party or a ball or something, and was in her car and wrecked. Let's see. Hold on. There we are. There's another vintage scene of White Rock Lake. So she was either trying to find her way home from a party or something like that, and they say that she had drowned in the lake, and her ghost is trying to find her way home. And most definitely, White Rock is a creepy place after dark. It's surrounded by heavily forested area and lonely Lothar Drive. But if you're there at twilight, keep an eye out for a ghostly hitchhiker. Now, I mentioned that this is a well-known story that you will hear actually around the world. There are many other ladies of the lake too. And in Spanish, in speaking communities, she's sometimes called La Llorona, or the Wailing Woman. And this is the other ghost story that has to do with lakes. Is there's a woman who has lost her mind and drowned her children in the lake, and so she's forever lamenting her crime, and she haunts the shoreline of the lake. So that's the Lady of the Lake. And not very far, right off of across from the lake, is Flagpole Hill. So let's talk about Flagpole Hill for a minute. This is, of course, over at Northwest Highway and Buckner Boulevard, and it's a fun place to go jogging or see the lake from that beautiful vantage point. It's a really great place, and it's fun during the day. But I got to tell you, once the sun starts going down, things get a little unusual there. There's all kinds of reports of strange and paranormal sorts of activity. And sometimes they say that rocks have been thrown at cars when there's no one there to throw them. Sometimes there's strange noises coming from seemingly nowhere. And sometimes people feel like there's a weird presence there. Who is this ghost? Who do you think this person might be? One of the legends is that the spirit might be someone who committed suicide on the hill many years ago. But another version of the story is that the ghost didn't commit suicide, but was killed in a car accident that was driving by on Northwest Highway. So anyhow, we don't know exactly who the spirit is, who the ghost is, but regardless of who that is, it's definitely a creepy area after dark. And I have driven around there at dusk, and I can attest that it's a spooky place. Well, let's see. Let's go on a little bit to another one. This might be even a little more less known to some people. This is the place now currently known as the Sammons Center for the Arts. This is a wonderful old over 100-year-old building that was built in 1909 and served the Dallas water utilities for many years as the Turtle Creek Pump Station. This is image that you're seeing now is what it looked like at the time it was built. And it was one of the, until the Bachman treatment plant opened in the 1930s, this was one of the biggest, if not the major pump station for city water in the city of Dallas. But by the time they built the Bachman treatment plant in the 1930s, it was decommissioned and was used for things like storage and for other types of activities. It was still used by the city through the decades, but it was pretty much abandoned by around 1959. Anyhow, the Sammons Center for the Arts started actually as a sort of an arts center in 1981, and then it became the Sammons Center in 1988. But there's been a lot of interesting kind of creepy things that have happened here. Employees of the Sammons Center have heard things like unexplained voices and noises. And the most interesting feature is that it had an old elevator for many years. And this was one of those elevators that sort of had its mind of its own, you might say. It opened and closed whenever it wanted to. Didn't always go where people wanted it to go, that kind of thing. I once worked in a building in San Antonio that was like that, in an old Carnegie library that it was an old cage elevator, and that thing definitely had a mind of its own. Anyhow, the people who worked in the building kind of got to know this spirit of sorts, and because of the elevator, the spirit running the elevator, they decided to name him Otis after the elevator company, which I think is great. But anyhow, there have been apparitions from time to time in the building. This is a vintage photograph of part of the machinery, one of the machinery rooms in the old pump station. And one of the apparitions that's made an appearance from time to time is described as a young man wearing overalls and a jacket and a workman's cap. In fact, here are workers in a pump station. Some staff believe that the building is haunted by a young man who was killed in the basement during an accident with some of the machinery in the 1920s. But anyhow, no one really quite knows what's been going on. Whoops, excuse me. Anyhow, there have been all kinds of noises, apparitions, things like that in the building. And the ghost seems to like the ladies, because on occasions when a woman walks by a door, the door magically suddenly opens up. But let's go on to our next story. Our next story has to do with the story of some of the earliest pioneers or white settlers of the Dallas area. And this stern-looking gentleman on the right is John Merrifield, who went by Jack. And Jack Merrifield came with some family members to Dallas in the 1840s, which is very early, because Dallas itself was only founded in the early 1840s. But this gentleman is an interesting historical figure because he was born in 1792, which meant that made him old enough to fight in the War of 1812, and was at one of the battles of in the battles for the New Orleans, and he was at the Cotton Bales battle. So anyhow, he had an interesting background behind him when he came here. He was one of the first settlers in Oak Cliff, which was then called Hoard's Ridge. And he farmed and owned land at the present day site of what's now Hampton and Jefferson. And that's in fact the corner that you can see in the photo right there. That's the corner of Hampton and Jefferson. And his farm included the entire site of the footprint of where Sunset High is now. So he had a really nice spread there. But people drive by over at Hampton and Jefferson and see this tiny little cemetery, which was abandoned after many years of neglect and was donated to the city of Dallas. So it's actually a city-maintained cemetery. Anyhow, Merrifield himself what is there, and he had up to about 35 or 40 other family members in this plot. And although over the years, very sadly, the headstones have been removed either by vandals or again through through scavengers and people like that. So sadly, it's not much left of it, but you can still see it, and it's been a feature of Oak Cliff for many years. But there is a sad story that's associated with one of Jack's sons. Jack had a son named Benjamin Franklin Merrifield, and he was passing the place one night. This is in the 1860s. He was still here, farming with the family. But he was one night passing the family plot and with a female companion, and he said, this might be a nice place to be buried. But a week later, he ended up being buried there. He had been at a dance that was attended by a number of people. Some of them were people from the former French colony, the La Réunion colony, and he got into an argument with either a Frenchman or a descendant of one of the French La Réunion Frenchmen, who stabbed him over, I believe, a fight over a woman. But anyhow, the Frenchman disappeared, never heard from again, and Ben Merrifield was one of the first people to be buried in that cemetery. I mean, he had seen the plot, but he thought it would be a nice place, and little did he know he would wind up there himself. Well, let's continue into Oak Cliff, and let's see. Now we're going to talk a little bit about a ghost that I think is very interesting, or a spirit presence, that's called the Coombs Creek ghost. And people who are familiar with Oak Cliff know where Coombs Creek is. And Coombs Creek Drive is actually a pretty spooky sort of place to drive any time of day or night, but it particularly at dusk or at night. And there is a train trestle, as you can see here in this photograph. And it's particularly around here that people have seen an apparition. And that's an apparition of a teenage girl or a young girl who is riding her bicycle down Coombs Creek Drive, and they say that she haunts the street near the trestle. There's several different stories of how she died. One story is that she was on the trestle and hit by a train, but other people say that she was actually on Coombs Creek Drive and wrecked her bike and fell into the creek and died. And anyhow, there's only one way you can definitely tell if you're in that area, if she's around, because you might hear the sound of a bicycle bell. Zing, zing. All right. Well, next, we're going to go to downtown and talk a little bit about the Pioneer Park Cemetery, which is partly the Old City Cemetery. Sometimes it's referred to as the Old City Cemetery, but it's actually a series of 3 or 4 cemeteries. And it's over in front, what's now the Dallas Convention Center and Dallas Memorial Auditorium. Over on off of Young Street and bordered off of Ackert Street. But anyhow, there are a lot of restless souls in this one because the cemetery was one of the earliest in Dallas, and originally the original portion of it was established by Freemasons, the Masons in Dallas, by Tannehill Lodge, who owned one half of it, and the other half was owned by the Independent Order of Oddfellows of Dallas Lodge number 44. And anyhow, they owned part of it, and then another portion of it was used by Temple Emmanuel as a Hebrew cemetery, so that's a third group. And then the fourth group was used by the city as a paupers or indigent cemetery. But so there's quite an interesting mix of people there. The first burials in there were probably around in the mid 1840s, and that was maybe less than 1,000 people in Dallas. So this was still well within the city boundaries and right at the edge of what was the city of Dallas. But the city, of course, came to grow around it. But the place is actually the final resting place of 6 mayors, 6 former Dallas mayors, 3 veterans of the War of 1812, 9 veterans of the Texas Revolution, 29 Civil War veterans, 14 colonists who were a part of Peters Colony, which the city of Dallas was established within, 5 members of the La Reunion French colony, a couple of county judges, a couple of district judges, several notable historical women, a lieutenant, and of course, a number of the early doctors, lawyers, clergymen, merchants, law enforcement officers, people like that, and of course their families, mothers, their wives. But so there are lots of possibilities of seeing apparitions here at dusk or at night, and there's probably more stories than I can tell in an hour's time. But this photograph that you're looking at is actually from the late 1950s, and it shows you the sort of state of disrepair that this old cemetery fell into. It's kind of sad because it wasn't being maintained very well, and it took on the look of what most people think of when they think of a creepy old cemetery. And anyhow, in 1907, the Santa Fe Railroad had excavated the western edge of the cemetery, and it said that when the workers hauled away dirt by the wagon load, that they found bones sticking out of the dirt. So there's been a lot of disruption over time. The Freemasons moved their disinterred and reinterred their people in another cemetery, and the Oddfellows purchased what's now about a third of Grove Hill Cemetery over on Samuel Boulevard to reinter their people. And likewise with Temple Emmanuel, their people were moved. So that left a few other people who are still there. But anyhow, the fact that graves have been disturbed over time, and the fact that unfortunately there's been some building going on, which is probably on top of graves. If you've ever seen the movie Poltergeist, you know what happens to places that are built on top of burial sites. Anyhow, this is a photograph from about 1960, where you can see a grave site, a small family plot that's literally just butting up against the Memorial Auditorium, which is a fairly new building right then. Anyhow, I have a feeling that some people probably didn't like being disturbed. And I'll show among the people who are still left there, this is the gravestone for Little Ann, who died in 1878. And it's an interesting cemetery or collection of cemeteries. And you can pick up on a lot of history there. But it's been cared for somewhat better by the city and by the park department, and it's now called Pioneer Park. And the far end of it, the west end of it, which was I assure you is not cemetery property, but is now the home to the cattle drive sculpture. But anyhow, the Pioneer Park Cemetery is a fascinating place with probably all kinds of people who are spirits who are still wandering around out there. Well, let's continue moving on to another part of the downtown area, and that would be over on Theater Row. Elm Street, as it winds through the central business district, was very well known as and was called Theater Row because of all of the movie theaters, vaudeville houses, and theaters for stage productions and things like that. But among the most famous of them is the Majestic Theater, and the Majestic is a grand old lady, and she's been renovated several times. It's a beautiful building. Needless to say, it's one of the best places in the city of Dallas to see a performance or see music or listen to whatever you want there, whatever kind of entertainment comes through the Majestic. But it was built by Carl St. John Hoblitzell, who owned the Interstate Theater Circuit. And that at one point, that was the largest privately owned movie theater circuit in the Southwest. So Mr. Hoblitzell poured money into some of the buildings that he had, and particularly into the Majestic, which was sort of his flagship building and theater. His offices were up in the top of the building, And he had a beautiful suite of offices that are still up there right now as it is being renovated right now. But and this photograph shows you the sort of opulence that makes up the Majestic Theater. It's a gorgeous building, and it's the kind of place where, and actually it was the site of the filming some films like the Phantom of the Paradise, the Brian De Palma film, which is another spooky story. But anyhow, the people who've worked here for many years, many decades, have definitely believed that there are some spirit residents here, and some people think that it's Karl Habitzel himself making his presence known through the theater backdrops. That the backdrops move by themselves sometimes. And sometimes phones light up when there's nobody calling. And other people think that there might be someone who might have either died in the building or someone who died and wanted to haunt the Majestic Theater. Sometimes they smell perfumes, a woman's perfume, on different floors at night when there's no one there. So the Majestic is another legendary place. Well, I'm going to move on to move a little south of there and over off of Hervey Street and over to what's now called Dallas Heritage Village. And it is on the site of Dallas Heritage Village has taken over what used to be called Old City Park, which was the original first city park purchased by the city of Dallas for the citizens of Dallas. And it was built in the park itself was built in the late 1870s and served as the Old City Park up until the time that it became Dallas Heritage Village in the mid 1960s. But among the interesting things they did here was to build Dallas Heritage Village. Is this beautiful property has space has become the home to all kinds of beautiful buildings, vintage buildings of all kinds of different architectural styles that have been relocated from their original sites over to Dallas Heritage Village. And I strongly encourage you to visit. In fact, I believe this Saturday there's a drive-through Halloween event going on there that you can register for. But anyhow, Dallas Heritage Village opened in 1966, and one of the first things they did was they deconstructed Millermore, which was a plantation mansion, which was originally over around in the area of Bonneview and Illinois avenues in far south Oak Cliff. It's a beautiful building, and you can see in this picture where they're reconstructing it and putting it back together. It was originally built in 1855, or started in 1855 and was finished in 1862. And it was the home of William Brown Miller and his family, which is, of course, why it's called Millermore. But and he and various family members lived there for about 100 years or so. And anyhow, there are several possible things that happen there. Of course, it's filled with vintage furniture that would be appropriate to the period. And what's fun about going through these historic buildings is to sort of imagine yourself in them or imagine who might have lived in them. But people who work at Dallas Heritage Village say they've seen the figure of a woman in the upstairs master bedroom moving from the one window from the bedroom over to what was the children's nursery. And they sometimes see the silhouette of a woman who's been seen in the bottom middle pane of glass at the front of the master bedroom. Back to the old photo. There you go. So imagine yourself here at Millermore at dusk or in the evening and seeing a little face in the window. That might be pretty creepy. Anyhow, they don't really know who the woman is, but Heritage Village staff have learned from Miller's descendants that there was a daughter-in-law of William Brown Miller and his third wife who committed suicide in the house. And they don't know exactly when, and they don't know much about it or exactly where, but there definitely was a death inside the house, which may account for a spirit. And other people have seen maybe an orb of light in the same window where the silhouette's been seen. But anyhow, it's been investigated by ghost hunters numerous times, and ghost hunters, and it's mentioned in a lot of different sites. So Millermore is one of the more famous places, but it's good and spooky, as are some of the other buildings there at Dallas Heritage Village. Well, I'm going to start winding up here with one little story, which I don't think too many people have heard. And this is the story of the Deep Ellum ghosts. And I like this story because it was recounted by a folklorist who was here in Dallas and also in Austin, a gentleman named J. Mason Brewer. And J. Mason Brewer is important because he started taking down folk tales and stories, and he has an entire book that's called Dog Ghosts, and it's a fascinating book, and it's not just about dog ghosts. It's actually about all kinds of different apparitions and African American stories of apparitions and ghosts and such. But anyhow, the way the Deep Ellum ghost story goes is that there was a movie theater that was once in Deep Ellum called the Harlem Theater, and you can actually see a photo of it right here. And it was a segregated theater that was built for African American audiences and featured black cast films. But it was a big feature in the 1920s and the 1930s. It was called the Palace Theater in the 1920s, and then it was later renamed the Harlem Theater. But it was in the midst of the rough and tumble Deep Ellum that people think about, filled with pawn shops and things like that. I believe it was next door to the Day and Night pawn shop. So anyhow, so this is back in the 1930s. So the Harlem Theaters has just emptied out for its last show of the night. And there's a woman in a white dress, and she's wearing a ring on a chain. And she approaches a cab and asks the cabbie to take her over to Betterton Circle, which is in North Oak Cliff. And Betterton Circle, if you are familiar with it, is part of the 10th Street Historical District, which was platted in around 1904 by W.J. Betterton. And anyhow, this is a picture of a typical house that you would find in the Betterton Circle neighborhood. And I don't have a photo of we don't know exactly what home that the ghost story alludes to, but let's pretend that it's this one. So the cabbie is taking this mysterious woman who doesn't speak, doesn't say anything, over to Betterton Circle. And the taxi reaches the address, and the cabbie turns around, and the woman is gone. But in her place is a big yellow dog who's wearing a ring on a chain around its neck and is sitting right where the woman was. So, of course, the cabbie's completely freaked out. He jumps out, and he runs up to the steps of the house, and he bangs on the door. Let me in, let me in. So Man opens up and says, "Yeah, can I help you?" And then the cabbie's going like, well, I don't know how to tell you this, but I think I've just seen a ghost, and there's this dog that appeared and then disappeared in my cab." The man says, "Well, yes, that's the ghost of my dead wife. Today's actually the anniversary of the day she died, and she likes to come and see me every year on this day." And he said to the cabbie, "Would you like to come and join us and hang out for a while?" I don't think the cabbie stuck around for that, but I love this story, and it's an authentic piece of Dallas folklore that was taken down in the 1930s or 40s by the legendary J. Mason Brewer. Anyhow, I hope this has told you a few ghostly stories and getting you in the mood for Halloween. And I hope you'll have a fun and safe time. And I really appreciate your attention today. Thank you so much.
Well, John, that was fantastic. I am definitely in the mood for Halloween. And it looks like earlier at where I live, the sun was out. Now it's all cloudy. So I think that sharing these ghost stories did something. And we have a couple and so if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll share those with John. We did have a question. You mentioned about that building that was moved. Where was that originally?
Oh, that would be referring to Millermore, which was part of the last plantation that was in Dallas County. And Millermore was over off of Bonneview Road and around Ledbetter, I believe. And it was, let's see, it was, yeah, not Ledbetter, Bonneview in Illinois. And it was moved in the 1960s over to what's now Dallas Heritage Village.
We also had a couple of people share their ghostly encounters in the chat. And one was at the cemetery, the Pioneer Park Cemetery that you mentioned. They said that they were having lunch there with a coworker and they saw one of the tombstones move. And they were so scared they ran all the way back to City Hall.
That is great.
That is a great one. And I have a question. Are there any ghosts linked to what happened to John F. Kennedy and all the people involved with that? That was, there was, some deaths surrounded with that event and stuff. And often that leads to haunts or spirits or apparitions.
That's an excellent question. And I felt certain someone would probably bring that up. I could probably do several hours alone on spirits and hauntings relating to the Dealey Plaza area. And it certainly got an unusual history and, of course, a tragic history. But yes, there's supposed to be all kinds of ghosts and apparitions around the Dealey Plaza area. And it also, is literally where Dallas starts, because the area where the pergolas are actually in what you might call where the parking lot is for the Sixth Floor Museum is approximately where John Neely Bryan's cabin originally was built, on a bluff overlooking the Trinity River. So the very first spots in the city of Dallas, the town of Dallas, were laid out right in that area. And no doubt that there were some tragic events and creepy events and things like that. So, and it's also in the neighborhood of the courthouse. So there is little doubt that there are probably all kinds of spirits and apparitions flitting around in that area.
That is fascinating. And it looks like there are some people here who would love to hear more Dallas ghost stories. So if you ever decide you want to give another presentation, we are welcome to have you back. And with that,
Awesome.
there are, we have, yes, that we're getting encores for that. And we have another person who wanted to share their ghostly encounter. And this says, I was in a hotel that was new and a worker had died while it was under construction.
Hmm.
As one of the first guests, I was in the back area of the suite when I heard the doorknob turning. I stepped back into the sitting room area and the doorknob was still turning. I got the nerve to go over to the door and no one was there in the very long hallway. So that's pretty spooky. Oh, and now we have another one. Oh, linked to one of the Dallas Public Libraries. So this person worked at the Commerce Public Library in Commerce, Texas. I'm sorry, not the Dallas Public Library, in Commerce, Texas. It's a building that was an old post office. And we used to always hear stuff and the doors opening and closing. Kids used to ask us if it was haunted or if anyone had ever died there. And speaking of that, I actually just had a conversation this morning with a coworker who worked at Dallas City. She still works at Dallas City Hall, and she had a ghostly encounter there too. Do you know of any supposedly hauntings of the Dallas City Hall building itself?
I don't know of any one specifically myself, but having been here for 20 years and been here late at night or early in the morning, I can tell you there's definitely some interesting presences here. There's definitely something going on here. Just don't know exactly who or what, but this place definitely has an atmosphere at different times of evening.
I agree 100% because I think lots of different employees have been there at different times, and the building is so massive, and there's like basements and lower level 1 and lower level 2 and all of these things. And definitely there are some strange going ons there in Dallas City Hall. And
Very good.
yes, and so we also had, do you know of anything about the Adolphus Hotel and if that is haunted?
Yes, there are a number of stories about the Adolphus, and I chose not to do that one today simply because it's been covered a lot. I don't have my notes in front of me, but it definitely has a rich haunted history for sure.
It's always it's either fun or scary to stay in a haunted hotel. That's for sure.
No
okay,
doubt.
So we have one more question. I wonder if the grounds of Millmore House is now the grounds of the Cedar Crest Golf Course.
Did you say Brown?
The Millmore House is now, are they the grounds of the Cedar Crest Golf Course?
Oh, no. That it's further out. Cedar Crest has been around for a long time. But no, I don't believe that's the same area.
Okay, and I think
No,
this
I think
will
it's
be our
further down.
okay.
Oh, go
All
ahead.
right,
I'm sorry.
No worries. I think this will be our last question because we're getting close to the top of the hour. What about those spooky tunnels in downtown Dallas? Are those haunted?
Ah, the tunnels, the Santa Fe tunnels underneath the Santa Fe building. Some people think they are haunted. It's a small series of tunnels that were used for transporting goods. It's a long story, but the tunnels are big enough to hold an actual locomotive, and I know people who've been down in them and say that it definitely has a weird presence, that there may be spirits or that maybe something happened. I know that it's flooded before, and so it's definitely a dank and creepy kind of place. So who knows what kind of spirits might be down there.
Oh, true, true, true. We did actually have a question if anyone knew if there were ghost tours available, like after COVID or anything. And I'm not too familiar with some ghost tours. Are you familiar with any of those, John?
No, I'm not. Don't believe so.
Well, that sounds like that's a niche that somebody might need to fill when we're able to gather again. So with that,
Sounds good.
I know. And there are ghost tour services by the farmers market. Thank you for sharing that. That was put into the chat. All right. So with that, I want to thank everybody for sharing your time with us today. I want to thank John Slate for sharing his expertise and his knowledge and his scary stories, and the Dallas Public Library for hosting this. And remember, a recording of this will be on the Dallas Public Library's YouTube page. If you look under playlists, look for Dallas Environmental Quality and Sustainability. You'll find it there. Plus, everyone who registered in advance for this will get an email in a couple of days from the Dallas Public Library with a way to record, with a way to download this recording so you can watch it again. And also remember, if you would like your free thank you gift, send an email with your name and mailing address to greendallas@dallascityhall.com. And we want to wish everybody a safe and happy Halloween.
Thanks, Helen. Thanks, John. Thanks, everybody, for coming.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.